So in part one of this new direction of the series, likes in the time of Corona, we had on a man with great experience and wisdom, David J. Smith, who gave some quite pointed advice, did he not, to millennials, Nicolas? What did he have to say about how we should be using this time of lockdown?
I felt like he encouraged a lot of Fulbrighters, millennials, to kind of document their experience, to kind of speak in a way about what they are living through, and to use the technology to do that. I felt it was a call for doing that, for blogging or podcasting the change in some way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he had a very pointed thing to say. He has a lot of the millennials and even millennial Fulbrighters that are coming to him saying, oh, like I'm struggling to, get a job and whatnot. And he's saying like, well, are you networking? Are you making the most of the internet's capability to share your story and what you're doing?
Are you trying your best in some way? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to, I think it's great that we're having you on for part two of this section, because you are one of those millennials that David was really referring to. So to tell us a bit about where you're at in your Fulbright journey, because only a year ago you were a master's student in France.
Exactly.
And now you're coming to the end of your time in the Midwest. So I know that what's next for you when you get back to France?
So what's next for me is to professionalize myself in some way, and Fulbright has helped me in a way I didn't imagine, which is that I developed a kind of a skilling up in technology by developing this podcast, by kind of creating content, and they took me places I didn't expect, and I think that's still important.
So let's just zone in on that podcast, because it is kind of the reason that we're here, in the sense that you made a post on the Fulbrighter Network global feed about hey guys, I've got this podcast, you may be interested in it, Fulbright people, because it's about intercultural understanding and overcoming linguistic barriers. I say to you, tell us firstly how to pronounce the word. I'm gonna have a pop here. Tell me how I do.
Okay.
Choucroute.
Choucroute, exactly.
Choucroute. And so before you tell us about what it's about, just tell us about that word, choucroute.
Choucroute reflects the fact that we are all exploring in some way. It's a new word, so you could not really achieve to pronounce it correctly the first time, right? It comes with experience. It's a word that we created from three languages: French, Spanish, and German. It has the Spanish intonation on the first U and the German one on the second U. And it's a kind of word reflecting a melting pot. Choucroute is a name of a German meal. Pronounce it in the French way with Spanish accents.
I love it, man. And I think it's wonderful when the name of something signals to what it's about. So network ? A Fulbrighter conversation. And we're questioning whether the digital transformation of Fulbright can work for us through these conversations. And I think it's really elegant that you captured that in one word. And I hope that people will go and explore the content in there, because you're into your second series now. Series one was all podcasting. And there's great stuff there about overcoming linguistic barriers. I know it was a fellow FLTA from Austria, I believe, who started it with you, and you've had guests on from around the world. But you're now exploring how can we amplify our the reach of our content by taking part in other platforms. So tell me about the fact that, like this series, you actually embrace video. Tell me about how you made the move from audio only to video.
Yeah. So as you said, we just moved from Anchor to YouTube. And, sometimes in history, French scholars speak of the force of circumstances, la force des choses, to underline the way sometimes a chain of events change your way of thinking, your ways of doing something. And something similar happened to us within like the pandemia context. And it had totally an impact on our way to conceive like digital contents. There was really nothing surprising in there, just some kind of acceleration. We talked a bit about it earlier, like we were already in a visual era, but we are now in a hyper visual era, I think. And therefore, when you come to that kind of end, you want to end up covering possible new contexts of reception, producing something that stays attractive, and you question your own attractivity and originality at some point. And that's why the move to audio, like from audio to video, was kind of tricky, because it placed us on an edge, like given like our technical possibilities. We came from a studio very well equipped to our computer microphones. It's a challenge. It's a structural challenge as well, because you have to rethink your content, you rethink your structures. But in the end, it's also a test for your kind of adaptability in some way. And it was really interesting to do that. And we're going to move forward and maybe explore some things like live streams in the coming weeks or months. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome, man. And I think, what do you think that, for any Fulbrighters out there who are, thinking about starting out on that journey of creating content that is beyond just, static text and photos, that the text and photos were the staple of Facebook in terms of statuses. And then, Instagram obviously honed in on the photo aspect. I think, the vast majority of social media users are really comfortable with those two forms. But can get very squeamish when it comes to, audio visual, hearing their own voice back, or, and even worse, probably seeing themselves, particularly if it's for an extended period. Like I have to when I watch back episodes of Network. So, what advice can you give to folks who, have never, put themselves out there, in recorded form in that way?
Accept the unexpected in some way, of course, when you have a background in performing arts or something like that, it can help to kind of re-listen to your voice, to even accept to see yourself in action, do something that you didn't do before. I think doing a podcast pushes you to kind of stage yourself in some way. And once you focus on the content, you overcome this kind of barrier that you can have in the first place. I think it's really, you come to learn about yourself as well. And my advice is to actually not hesitate to post your content, your digital content, to places you wouldn't have thought of in the first place. I don't know, niche platforms. Fulbrighter is a good example for me, and we're going to talk about it maybe in a while. But when you did not expect a reaction, there could be actually multiple reactions, and that's the key, I think.
Yeah, I think I think that there are really two aspects towards the content creation. I think they feed into each other, and it's one, the spark, the creative spark, of what you're going to make, and then secondly, who you're going to try to reach and who you're going to share it with. But in the end, it kind of becomes synergistic. I think that, things can sometimes end up a different way than when you started. So for example, with this series, it started as me, just posting statuses, posting out. And then, it was picked up, to be featured in News and Reflections, but we are having these comment chains, down below. So we decided, hey, we've got to embrace this going into the new year and actually have it as a video conversation format. So I think I love the fact that you point out that we can't always expect the way that things are going to go. And, we've kind of got to roll with the punches a little bit. But I guess, even before, they've created their first bit of content and they put it out, if they just need a starting place of like, what on earth to talk about? I mean, like, do you have any recommendations for, thinking about topics? I I mean, I'm sure we can probably both share about our first, podcast was, mine was Flip Phone Diaries, which, it was very niche. It was about me and my friend, our challenge we started to, give up using our smartphones once each week. And, I think that, tell us about where choucroute started. I think that you've probably done a better job of immediately finding like the niche interest audience. So tell me about how the idea first came up, and then what you see as that niche audience to connect with.
Yeah, okay. So choucroute came from a shared experience of an international kind of journey. And basing on this experience, on this kind of common perceptions of some things, we decided to go further and to create content. The thing is that when you are part of a community such as Fulbright, it gives you a lot of experimental possibility, because Fulbright in itself is an experimental community, I think, in some way. And then when you come to speak of your kind of architectures of visibility on the web and your ways to create like content accordingly, it eases the thing a bit. I wouldn't say that we created choucroute sur mesure on Fulbright community, but it's a big part of it, because FLTAs have been huge part of the show. They have been our guests and everything. And in some way, the podcast kind of consolidated our pre-existing community in some way. So therefore, for someone who wants to start, I would recommend to kind of start from his experience, start from his passions, maybe.
Yeah, I've actually got to say, in a sense, I kind of envy the fact that, it's a very niche topic, this really strong interest in intercultural stuff and linguistic barriers. And frankly, you couldn't really ask for a better niche audience than the Fulbrighter community for you. I've got to share, like, with Flip Phone Diaries, we were a couple of years ahead of the curve, let's say, on thinking about digital wellness and taking that seriously, and like calling out what we saw as smartphone addiction, which is now a scientifically recognized phenomenon, recognized across, at least a quarter of the youth population in the developed world now. But when we were doing it, we didn't really know who to share it with, and unfortunately, I feel that we didn't really end up engaging people as much, which is why I wanted to make sure that this series was really focused on engaging a specific community. And I guess you make a really good case that the Fulbright community is a great place for Fulbrighters to engage with. Like, almost by definition, they're doing something that is that those other people will be able to connect with. And I guess coming back to David, David saying to us, look, let's make the most of this awesome platform that is here. Why don't you tell us about, I'm sure some people have signed in for the first time and seen the global feed and maybe been a little bit nervous about it. Why don't you tell us about your first post that you made, like, speaking of experimentation?
Yeah. So when I shared the show on Fulbrighter, I really didn't expect any kind of reaction, like any even like individual response to what I was posting. And when Rob himself reacted, introducing himself as the creator of the platform, I realized like how much like I had an experience of social medias that was totally different, and that my kind of notions of visibility and impact of what I was posting was actually very standardized in some way by my use of Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And because the social medias I used like on a daily basis deal with this kind of notions, Rob's kind of Rob's intervention actually reactivated some kind of awareness of the unexpected in some way. And I think that's the whole point about Fulbright. You see, man, like, we have this conversation right now. I didn't know you a few days back. You see what I mean? And the fact that we still have the conversation proves that Fulbright allows you to do something like that, to kind of connect where you didn't expect to connect in some way.
That's amazing. And I love the unexpected connections that can come about when you put yourself out there. And I've got to be honest with you, like, I totally connect with that fear or that expectation of just like falling flat and nothing coming of it. I actually, as a historian, I actually wanted to specifically ask you about this, because you know, when you post, you know, in terms of that piece we've been saying about taking a lot of shots, experimentation, you know, there's a well-observed phenomenon in even the most rigorous science that they will, you know, confirmation bias, that they will publish the results that, you know, that look good. And in the same way, you know, Instagram influencers do it too. They monitor the first 10 minutes of engagement, see that it's not on a good path, and then delete the post. So, you know, what do you think about that? I mean, I might, you know, make the quite grandiose claim that everyone is acting as their own curator in the digital exhibition of their life. And, you know, you know, can you bring a historian's perspective to that? You know, what do you think it does to, you know, to someone when they do self-edit, you know, in such a rigorous way? Do you think it's a good practice because it amplifies the win, you know, the successful experimentations, or do you think that it can be quite demotivating to be, you know, self-editing that much?
So it depends on how you perceive the podcast, on which level of use you perceive your podcast or digital content. If you place yourself as a historian, you're going to be tempted to leave it as it is with least self-editing as possible, because it becomes a testimony for the future. The podcast become a content, like something that reflects the time we're living in, that reflects the changes and everything. And therefore, my perspective would be to leave it authentic, you know, and to not delete it when it's possible. But then again, like, there are different considerations about that. And in my opinion, when you look at the history of the web, which is fairly recent and which is a singularity, because on one hand, the web is really a recent kind of thing, but it's maybe the place where you have the most sources possible, the most content in terms of video and audio. And when you look at what first bloggers did, I was listening to an interview of Justin Hall a few days back, and he was talking about this feeling of exploration, you know, there's this built digital party and I want to be a part of it, you know, in some way. And when he did his first HTML things, like blogging randomly, not even being sure of like having any feedback of any sort, he wasn't saying like, I'm making history, you know, he was just having fun in some way. And I think that's also a beautiful part of the whole podcasting thing.
Yeah, so like I think that feeling of having fun and that almost create that flow of creation is really important. I think for some people, knowing that they can, you know, that they can delete something or that it will disappear after a certain amount of time can actually free them up with regards to you know, with regards to experimenting more. But
sure.
You know, my advice, my view I've come to is that I think most people are becoming more mature about, you know, discounting the past in terms of, you know, when kind of being critical of when we dig up, you know, past bits of snippets and out of context, because I think we're all aware, like, the historians of the future they won't be historians, they'll be data scientists. They will be dredging through the big data and you know, and like I said before, they could be more or less fair about the way that they bring out snippets. But I hope that, you know, everyone will, you know, be mature enough to say, you know, that was a while ago. You know, he said that 10 years ago, you know, at least he had the, you know, at least he had the courage to not delete this and, you know, act like 1984. So I think that, you know, I would encourage people to experiment and live their experiments publicly. And I guess my final thing I want to, you know, touch on in terms of finding that fun and flow in creating the content is, you know, do you have any recommendations for ways that, you know, Fulbrighters could think out of the box in terms of what their content is about? Because, you know, I enjoyed one of your most recent episode, May the 1st, on YouTube, or a recent episode, where you hosted a musician on there, and from Burkina Faso, I believe, and he performed there, and, you know, I think that was awesome you brought in the music. So, why don't you mention, I think Fulbrighters would love to hear about the fact that the way that you've, brought your music into your studies before. Like, I know you did your master's thesis on Bob Dylan's work. So why don't you tell us
Exactly.
a bit about that?
Yeah, so all my course has been in some way an attempt to kind of make my passions and academic interests like coincide in some way. And the Bob Dylan thing started like a while back with me and a friend covering a whole album, and only with GarageBand, working like from afar, like we were not even in the same towns, and we exchanged backing tracks and everything. And of course, my understanding of this music improved with my academic study of it. And I ended up like building myself up creatively, basing on those two different experiences. And this is also what led to the podcast in some way, because when I was doing this project, I was skilling up on GarageBand. I was skilling up on audio editing. And these skills actually helped me to start choucroute. So in some way, everything is kind of following a certain path when you kind of make the most of it. And this is I think what I was wanting to mention about that.
Love that, man. Yeah, so there we go. I think, Fulbright is a useful point of reference both for finding the connections between people in terms of your audience, but then, using that philosophy of, finding connections between unexpected things in the way that you create your content. So I think that I think there's a lot of inspiration there to take away. I think that David Smith will be very proud to see a millennial Fulbrighter making the most of lockdown and making the most of these tools. And I really hope that that other young Fulbrighters will be inspired, and maybe some not so young ones too. And we'll see how long the lockdown persists for, broadly speaking. But I look forward to continuing. I think that it's been an awesome note to end this two-part piece on lockdown. And this may be or may not be the last Fulbrighter conversation. That remains to be seen, whether the platform have the resources to continue it. But I really hope that they do, because I think that these conversations really are what the platform should be all about.
I hope they will be more, because this is a great series, man. Congratulations for that. And it placed me in an unexpected place in some way, and we had a really constructive dialogue. So I'm really happy about it.